Thanks to Cisco for sponsoring our day of podcasting at KubeCon. We had some great conversations. Thanks again to Cisco. You can learn more about Cisco and their microservices platform at mantle.io. That's MANTL.io. Hey, it's Alex Williams with a new stack on day 2 of KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, and here now with Joe Beda and Craig McLuckie. Hey guys, how are you?
Hey,
Hi.
great.
Nice to be talking with you.
Yeah, 2 former Googlers. Now you're about to venture onto your own with a new project, and you know, this is a little bit in advance of that, but we'd love to hear about it, what you guys are thinking about, a little bit about, you know, we'll get a little into your background too. So, Craig, you know, you came out of Google, just left recently. The Kubernetes project has, you know, been both of your guys real, you know, what you've been working on the past few years. What is it that you want to do with this new company? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about it, what the name is, and we can go from there.
Sure, happy to kind of give some details. And you're the first to hear this, so it's really exciting for us to have an opportunity to share it with you.
And just to be clear, we're on the floor at KubeCon, so it's a little bit public, so we may be we may be a little bit circumspect just because there's folks walking around.
Right.
But you know, at the end of the day, when we look at the success that Kubernetes has generated, it's providing what we call logical computing infrastructure. It makes your infrastructure almost invisible. It hides it from the developer and provides them a really simple way to build, deploy, and manage applications. A lot of the cloud providers are starting to lean into Kubernetes. We recently saw Azure launch a Kubernetes-based service. And there's no question that it solves a lot of problems for engineers. One of the challenges that we see is that for engineers that are looking at embracing Kubernetes, the technology, the barriers to entry are still too high. It's still too hard to get it installed, it's still too hard to get running. It's a pretty complex system, and it takes a fair bit to understand what the pieces are and how they relate and how you'd use it. So when I think about you know, Joe and my mission as we enter into the startup space, the starting point for us has to be making Kubernetes more accessible to developers everywhere. Whether it is the OpenStack community that is looking to rationalize the way that they build and operate their infrastructure. We're certainly seeing a lot of success amongst some early adopters of Kubernetes as a underlying and supporting technology for OpenStack deployments. Or whether it's the Amazon engineer or small team that's looking to consolidate their infrastructure and reduce the Amazon bill somewhere between 50 and 80%. There's a set of capabilities that those individuals and groups need. And our goal is to work hand in glove with the Kubernetes community, with our friends and colleagues at Google, and make sure that this technology is radically accessible, very simple, and works everywhere.
Okay, so the name of the company is Heptio?
Heptio.
Heptio. And what does Heptio mean?
Well, so there's a long sort of, you know, history and lore around the number 7 with Kubernetes. You know, the logo has 7 sides, and so we wanted to, you know, as we looked at, you know, and our ambitions for Heptio go beyond just making Kubernetes accessible over time. We want to extend some of the same sensibilities around Kubernetes across the entire space, and help people realize sort of the true sort of cloud native vision as concrete as we can get about cloud native at this point. And so we wanted to play homage to the Kubernetes world without overtly, you know, pinning ourselves to Kubernetes. And so Hept is the Greek prefix for 7, and the IO is we were able to get the domain, so there you go, and it has good SEO, so that's kind of what you want in a company name at this point.
So tell us about, you know, the symbolism of 7 and, you know, in the Kubernetes world.
Sure. So this actually came from Brendan Burns. So Brendan was the 3rd founder on the Kubernetes project, and he had this love of, I think it's Star Trek. And he called Kubernetes 7 of 9, which is a character from Star Trek, which was a sexier Borg, because Borg was our internal.
Or let's,
Right.
for wider consumption, it's a more human Borg, right? It's a more accessible Borg, let's put it that way.
That's entirely fair. And so it was a friendlier Borg. And so we started calling it Project 7 internally. Of course, when it came time to name Kubernetes
For public release.
Public release and public consumption, it was impractical to call it 7. In fact, it was impractical to call it almost anything. Like we were pretty desperate when it came to naming. And
Now, if we wanted to call it Google something or another, we could have gotten that past the Google trademark folks. But it was important to us that Google not be in the name for Kubernetes, because we wanted it to have an
its
independent world outside of Google. And I think that's kind of obvious now, but it was not obvious when we were talking to all
Right.
the naming and trademark folks at Google.
Right.
certainly true. And so Kubernetes it was, but we always held on to that idea of 7, and it showed up in the logo, and we sort of carried forwards.
Interesting. So you talk about the ease of use and the need for more ease of use. Tell us specifically, where the roots of that come from. I know, for example, we just published an ebook on Kubernetes, and Johnny Kiram, MSV, wrote it, and he talked a lot about, you can use services, for example, to set up Kubernetes, right? So and if you use Google Compute Engine, it's a bit easier to do because it was originally built for Google, right? But if you're going to be building it on your own infrastructure, for example, it's a lot more difficult than if you use a service to do it, right? So you could use Rancher Labs, for example, to do that, or you could use other types of services. So what is that problem that you guys are trying to solve? What is that specific issue?
So I think the first thing to recognize that there's multiple sort of constituencies at play here. The first one, and over time, in some ways, we're seeing an evolution for how people view DevOps and Ops into a more mature model that works at scale inside of large organizations. And so one of the things that we're seeing here is what Craig and I have been calling operation specialization, sort of essentially taking roles that used to be conflated together and starting to break these things out. And we're seeing that mirror itself as you go to some of the talks here at KubeCon, as you talk to people in the community. So concretely, I think that there's 3 different roles that we're actually thinking about, and as we look at how to actually make things easier to use. The first one is the cluster operator. So these are the folks that get a cluster up and running and manage that cluster. And so much of the focus around ease of use has really been about how easy it is to set up and maintain and upgrade and deal with a cluster. And that's definitely a problem, and it's something that we're going to aim to help with. And you'll see a ton of folks around here that are really focusing on that problem. The second 2 constituencies are, and sometimes they're conflated with their hats that the same person might wear, are application developers and application operations. And so these are essentially the people that are users of the cluster. And I don't think we've given as much attention now yet to providing a really easy to use experience for the folks who are building and running stuff on top of a Kubernetes cluster. And over time, as Kubernetes becomes successful, we imagine that the problems around getting up and installing and maintaining a cluster will become a solved problem, or at least there'll be a lot of choices and a lot of resources around that. And the ratio between these cluster operators and these cluster users will go from 1 to 1 or 1 to 5 now, or it's the same person doing both of it. But over time, we're going to see that go to a 1 to 100 or 1 to 1,000, where you'll have clusters that are maintained by some efficient teams with lots of tools. Maybe it's you lean on another company to help you do that, but then you have a whole ton of users doing that. So the growth here is really going to be in terms of enabling the average user, even people who are not experts in Kubernetes, to get something out of a Kubernetes cluster. And so that's an easy use area that I think we're going to concentrate on a lot.
Yeah, I would say that just sort of extending what Joe was leaning into there. When you look at the way that the Kubernetes team operated, we spent an inordinate amount of time getting the domain model just right. And when a lot of distributed systems engineers encounter this for the first time, it really speaks to them. It resonates with them in a deep way. I've had lots of guys come to me and say, wow, this is the system I always dreamed of building. I just never found my way to do it or to get there. So the model really works well for distributed systems engineers. People understand it deeply. one of the challenges that a developer who is more focused on just getting their application up and running than they are on geeking on the sort of the beauty and sort of elegance of this distributed systems model is that they're exposed to too many concepts too quickly. So the engineers at Google are sort of deep systems engineers, and they like to do this kind of what I call a sort of a breadth first understanding of the space. They'll look at all the concepts, they'll internalize them, they'll understand them, and then the system speaks to them, and then they're able to construct these useful applications. That just isn't how most enterprise developers think. They don't have the time or luxury to really invest in and wallowing in the technology and coming to understand it. They want to be able to get a cluster quickly, and they want to forget as quickly as they can how they got there. They just want it to happen. And then once they're there, they want to get their application running as quickly and seamlessly as possible. They don't necessarily want to be exposed to a lot of underlying discrete distributed systems concepts. And so I think as we look to our sort of initial focus, it's really helping those people find a friendlier cluster, like find this environment friendly and accessible, easy to get going. And once you actually have that cluster environment, really easy to get your application running.
But there are trade-offs with making it easier to use. You can end up making it almost kind of, breaking it to some extent, right? You can end up making it not as really, by making it too accessible, you're kind of taking something away from it. How do you avoid that?
I mean, yeah, that's really the challenge here. I think it's easy to concentrate on that 5-minute experience at the expense of the next 5 months or the next 5 years.
Right.
And there's a lot of systems that over-rotate on that ease of use. And when we were designing the core concepts for Kubernetes, this is the type of challenge that we would face all the time. And anytime when you're designing an API or concepts, you face this challenge of, do I want to have a lot of granular, powerful objects that I can put together in interesting ways? Or do I want to take the 80, 90, 95% case, wrap that up into one concept that is easier to understand and easier to use, right? So there's always this tension between chunky, easy to use concepts versus very granular concepts that are super flexible in a whole bunch of different ways. We've seen this play out when we were at Google working on some of the core GCP APIs and concepts, and I think you see the same thing with Kubernetes. And so the key here is to start building up new systems that let us, if you go back to Java, there's this saying in the Java world where you want to make the easy things easy and the hard things possible. I don't think anybody's really nailed that in this sort of new web API space, right? Because the API, we don't have these higher level concepts to take granular, complicated stuff and bake it down into an easy to use, concept, but then provide sort of like a way to sort of drop back down to these more granular concepts when you actually need it. One analogy here is like sort of, Newtonian versus Einsteinian physics, right? When you first start learning physics, you learn simple Newtonian physics. It's all sort of makes sense based on your intuition around the world. As you advance, and you start learning about physics at the edges and more advanced concepts, there's this really beautiful decomposition where you're like, oh, I see, Newtonian physics is like these things, except we're ignoring these terms because they don't come into play most of the time. Right? So we need to find a way to present a Newtonian view of Kubernetes, such that it's very easy and it's very intuitive. But then when you approach sort of the speed of light, right? When you're doing advanced stuff with Kubernetes, you have that richer model that you can take advantage of. So it's not an either or, and that's really the challenge that we're going to be attacking.
And this is very much what we were looking to do when we started Kubernetes in the first place. So if you actually look back on what Joe and I did together, our first project was Google Compute Engine. And so we looked at sort of building some basic clean infrastructure that you could run any workload on. And then when we got to a point where that was up and running, we started looking at this world that existed between platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, where we had App Engine in market, and it was really good at a certain set of workloads, but eventually it'd fall off a cliff, and then there was nowhere to go. You couldn't, break down into the Einsteinian physics and actually, get to that next level. And then at the other side of the house, we had the virtual machines, but they were too hard and inaccessible for developers, versus the other thing. So So we very deliberately tried to distill out the essence of PaaS and actually create a very principled underlying logical infrastructure that you could build PaaS on top of, right? And I think that that was always the vision of what inspired us to do this. Actually, Joe came across Docker, and I remember him coming to me and saying, "Hey, you have to see this. It's like they put lightning in a bottle in terms of the basic packaging and developer experience thing." And then we started talking about like, okay, well that's gonna get you this far, and then you're gonna need a whole bunch of other things. That's what really got us thinking about Kubernetes as the next stage of the journey. And so I think that Kubernetes is almost uniquely suited to provide this sort of composed build-up story.
Right.
We've created this lovely piece of logical infrastructure. We're seeing a lot of folks, delivering these top-down kind of PaaS-like, capabilities. We want to continue to kind of create that bridging tissue so that you can create these more natural, consumable constructs that are then decomposed into all the fancy underlying distributed systems pieces.
So really leveraging those underlying primitives to then build on top of that the abstractions that allow you to have that kind of combined Newtonian, Einstein kind of experience.
Yeah, exactly. And we're still exploring exactly what that's going to look like, but this is the direction that we want to take it, is that we do want to provide Kubernetes for everyone, not just the people who geek out on distributed systems and seek this type of thing out.
So that sounds like a platform as a service in a way.
Well, in a lot of times, platform as a service binds up a whole bunch of concepts, right? And so it's very, like another analogy here that I've used in the past is many PaaSes today are fixed function, right? You have an architecture. If you fit within that architecture, you're great. But if you, and it's a very well curated path, with a great experience there. If you need something different, if you want to go off that path, there's a pretty steep cliff, that you're going to actually fall off of. And so what we want to do is we want to make that transition much more gradual, much more natural, much more not of a, am I doing PaaS or am I doing infrastructure? But like maybe for this piece of my application, I'm doing something that feels more PaaS-like. For this part of my application, I'm throwing away some of this stuff and using this stuff. So we're still looking at this as a set of fundamental building blocks that create an experience versus a starting with that experience first.
And I think one of the things that's really going to be interesting is you look at PaaS and often as not you don't get the sort of one size fits all story. One of the things that we are pretty passionate about is like domain-specific applications of these technologies. Like if you have a domain-specific database or you have some other domain-specific technology, do you have a nice set of elegant, reusable pieces that you can tune to that domain-specific application? And so it's not about delivering a PaaS. It's about delivering a PaaS construction kit, so that you can relatively easily assemble the story that works for you, based on your specific business needs, the specific set of technologies you want to use, and the way that you tend to run your business, without having to, snap to somebody else's vision of how your business should operate, and being able to assemble the set of pieces that make sense to you in terms of continuous integration, packaging, distribution, pieces.
So, I guess that coming to the end of the interview, I'm curious then, what are the most complex, aspects of the Kubernetes environment that you might logically abstract?
I think, just concretely, the relationship between deployments, replication controllers, pods, and services, there's good reasons why that stuff is broken out into 4 separate objects, and but 90% of the time, 95% of the time, you're going to use them in a relatively standard way, right? And as people look to get started with this stuff, the amount of boilerplate that they have to deal with that is just pure voodoo from somebody who hasn't sort of studied this world is really intimidating. And so making that more approachable, making it so that we can actually sort of bind those things together in a reasonably understood way, and then start breaking out those concepts for users as they need to, right? So that they can, learn advanced tricks as they can learn those advanced concepts, at their leisure after they actually get the system up and working for them and actually providing value. So we want to start providing value on top of Kubernetes before people have to spend a week understanding all the concepts.
Will this be offered as a service?
We're still figuring out what exactly it's going to look like. I think our gut here is to support the community and make sure that this is widely available. This is the first step on a long journey, right? So I don't think we know exactly where the journey is going to take us, but we definitely want to work in the open with the community to continue to boost Kubernetes as a healthy ecosystem as a whole.
And it'll be an open source effort?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the way we designed our approach to community and building technology in the initial Kubernetes project, it was largely successful because it was open, it was accessible, it was community-oriented. And as we look to Heptio, the company, we aim to maintain those values. And so our initial work will be in the open with the community, bringing whatever resources we can bring to bear to help every Kubernetes user everywhere in any environment. And over time, we hope to create a humble but sustainable offering. We just haven't figured out the final shape of that yet.
Yeah. It's pretty clear that the more successful Kubernetes is going to be, the more successful everybody in this room is going to be. So it's not about necessarily competing with everybody else here. It's more right now about just growing that pie and actually, bringing more people into this world, so that everybody here can participate.
Well, great. Well, good luck with the startup, you guys, and good to catch up a little bit about it. And we look forward to following it and following your guys' progress. So thank you very much.
Hey,
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks to Cisco for sponsoring our day of podcasting at KubeCon. We had some great conversations. Thanks again to Cisco. You can learn more about Cisco and their microservices platform at mantle.io. That's MANTL.io.